We're back yet again for another episode.
This is our Christmas New Year's episode. So I'm wearing my Hanging with My Nomies shirt.
You really do have the best Christmas sweaters. What did you have the other day? A ludicrous one?
Snoop. It was Snoop.
Nope. Yeah, that's dope too. Much better than the ones I have that are just obnoxious with like reindeer butt sticking out of it.
Actually, I do appreciate that as well.
Yeah. So that's our side hobby, our ridiculous sweaters that are Christmas themed, for those who did not know.
Mm-hmm. And we're excited today to talk about, well, actually, what's the title, Laura? You go ahead there.
So the title is that outside changes don't fix inside problems.
Boom,
And
there.
it's a little bit of my baby. And I will also share, I don't think I even mentioned this to you, that this is kind of the revelation that made me want to become a coach.
Ooh, okay.
Because prior to becoming a coach, I was a nutrition specialist, a manager, and a trainer. And I would encounter the same thing over and over again. People would come to me, they'd want to lose weight. They'd tell me they'd feel comfortable and confident if they lost 20, 30, however many pounds. And so we'd get to work, they'd lose the weight, but they never felt confident or comfortable. And their brain would just say, oh, you must need to lose more. So we'd get back to work, they'd lose more. But it was like the idea they had of how they would feel when they looked a certain way was never actually the reality of their experience. And
Oh
it
my
kind
God,
of helped
that
me
just like
realize,
took me somewhere else.
oh gosh, let's go. I'm on the ride. Take it.
It's a total sidebar. Okay.
Sidebar. Hit me.
This is a big one. I I can't stop going down the quantum physics rabbit hole, okay? And in the quantum physics rabbit hole, we live in a simulation and nothing's real.
Mhm.
And what you just said feels like proof to me that that is true because when we have an inner fat kid, and that's what I'm going to call it.
You're a
The
fat
inner
kid.
fat kid does not go away no matter how much weight you lose. And it's 100% psychological because you can't get out of that imprinted mindset of being the fat kid where whenever you were or whenever it was. And it's not the reality, but you can't see it.
Hmm. Okay, I agree. And
Okay.
so I was that inner fat kid because I was a fat kid. And my
Thank you for
moment
that
of,
explanation.
yeah, I don't know if you knew this about me, but big revelation right there. Um, my moment of like, something's messed up in my perception was when I was like working out to get in shape for my wedding. And one morning I had like this horrible shaming routine where I'd like step on the scale, grab my lower belly, and tell myself I was fat. It was like, good morning, Laura, you suck. Great idea, right? Um, but there was one morning I looked up and I saw my rib cage. And I was like, what the, how can I be so convinced I'm fat and see my entire rib cage? Like something's not right. And that's kind of when I was getting introduced to podcasts and coaching. And it was like right around that corner that I moved. So I agree that those aspects of us kind of move through life with us. However, I don't completely agree that you can't change that imprint because I have.
Oh yeah. No, I'm sure you can. I think anything can change with a lot of effort and work.
Yes. So like I know for me it was like understanding what I was experiencing that I would categorize as fat and then actually getting curious about what it was, which in my experience it was I overate or I ate something that made me feel bloated and I categorized that as fat. And so I kept telling myself I was fat. And then once I stopped doing those things, I didn't feel fat.
Well,
But I'm going to
Interesting.
bring our quantum physics back into the
Yeah, I went,
outside.
yeah.
But you're not wrong because it's all about perception. Like, what is real? And that's the hardest thing with like humanity and communication and connection is real is different to each and every person, but what you're experiencing is real to you.
So I want to throw this out there. This is a problem that I see with my clients and their relationships all the time because when we have an argument with someone, their perception of what's happening may be very different from your perception of what's happening. And we have to have space for that. We have to make, we, because, okay, what was it yesterday? I think I was talking to a client who was saying that, uh, damn it, just totally lost the story.
Okay. So I'll give you one
Okay.
where conflict in communication with different realities, that's what we're talking about, right?
Yes.
So there is someone in my life who was hurt by my husband and my choice to celebrate Christmas in Florida, right?
Yeah.
In my experience, we were making this decision not to hurt anyone, but because we had tried all these other options around how to enjoy our time. And it just, we couldn't find one yet in Chicago that allowed us to be with our family and enjoy Christmas because there was just so many things going on. We were pulled in a million directions. So we made the executive decision to celebrate in Florida. This person took it very personally, thought that it was very like us against them. We were doing it to them, we're the enemy. And that's not at all the reality of why we were doing it, but that is her reality of how she was experiencing it, right?
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you therapize someone going through that?
So I remember the example now. So it was a client that was fighting with a sibling, and she wanted her sibling to admit that she was wrong for a certain thing. And I
Mm.
said, well, I think the use of the word wrong is probably part of the problem because this isn't black and white, and perception is not black and white. So she may not think that it's wrong. It may have been received wrong, but that doesn't mean that she was intending it to be wrong. If
Hmm.
so, I think, and this is where I think intentions, I always say intentions matter, because your feelings can be hurt and that's still valid, but it wasn't my intention to hurt your feelings. Like this is where I was coming from with things. And I think a lot of times we don't want to explain that or we don't want to have those conversations and people avoid and then it gets bigger and it's a whole thing out here.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect example of how an outside change isn't going to fix the inside problem. In that moment, your client is feeling wronged, maybe insecure. I don't know enough the context, but she's having an internal and inner problem. And her solution is for her sibling, who is outside of her, to say they were wrong. And if they did, then she would feel okay. But that's not exactly how it works.
Yeah.
And like, ironically, this isn't just about, if you lose weight, you won't necessarily feel comfortable and confident in your own skin. If you get a bigger house, it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to feel more successful. If you get someone else to validate your experience, it doesn't mean that you're not going to feel hurt, which kind of brings us back to like, so what do we do when we recognize? Because as always, the first thing we have to do is have the awareness of I'm having an inside problem and I'm trying to fix it with an outside thing. Because if we don't recognize that, we're screwed, right?
Yeah.
So once you recognize, like, oh, I'm seeking validation for how I'm feeling, if you can understand that no matter how much validation you get on the outside isn't going to erase the pain on the inside, then you can actually attend to the problem with the proper internal solution, which is, you know, learning to soothe your nervous system and to like support your emotional self and validate your own experience.
Mm, that is so hard.
It is. It is very hard. But
Validate yourself when
yeah,
you're insecure. How the hell are we doing that?
well, I can tell you that what works for me is understanding like no one really gets to argue my experience.
Mm.
Like you don't have to agree with how I experience the world, but that doesn't mean my experience isn't my experience. And people don't like that. But
People
I'm
don't like a
not,
lot of things, okay?
I know, I'm used to it. I'm not crazy enough to think that like just because someone else doesn't experience something the same way I do means my experience is irrelevant. That's never accurate. Our experience of the world is our experience. It's never for someone else to say, that's not what your experience is. Now we can look at our experience and get curious around it and create clarity and understanding within it, sure. But that's only for us to do with a trusted source, such as a coach or therapist, or within ourselves. But for someone else to say this is not what you're experiencing, I can be like, okay, because I'm like, yes, I am. Like, I'm not going to argue whether this is an experience I'm having because I know it is. Like, it's like looking at the sky and arguing whether it's blue or green with someone. Like, I know it's blue. If you want to argue it's green, okay, go ahead. But I don't feel the need to defend that because I understand my experience. I trust my experience.
One of the things that you asked earlier is how do you therapy someone through that? And I think you just kind of answered the question because I think part of it is understanding that my experience is my experience. It doesn't have to be anybody else's, and my feelings are valid. And I think that's a bigger concept to wrap our heads around because then we tend to want to share that reality with someone else. Like that's the validation part.
Mhm.
I need you to see what I'm seeing, or else
Mm.
it's not real, or it doesn't matter. And I think,
That's when we go external.
yeah, yeah,
So why do we need them to see it, to make it real? Why does someone else's vision of our experience make it real?
that's the way that quantum physics works. So you have to observe something for it to happen.
Well, aren't you being the observer of the thing happening?
Yes, but then if no one else sees what you're seeing, are you hallucinating?
That depends. Are you on drugs or dehydrated?
I think for me, what has been helpful, I'll put it like this, at least in my relationship with Sebastian, we have gotten to a place where we can say, can you understand how I came to that? And for me, that's very important. Like, you don't necessarily have to agree with what I'm saying, but can you at least understand how I got where I got? And to
Mhm.
me, feeling understood is more important than you agreeing with me.
I think that's a good transition. I will say that for me, it's been kind of dual, like very similar to what you're talking about in the understanding, but also I recognize there's a handful of people in my life who just don't have the capability or desire really to understand. So in those moments, it's like I know I'm never gonna get external validation and I never expect it. So like this is something Scott and I will kind of throw the ball around with because we both have experiences with different people in our lives where I can just validate myself and he gets really angry that they won't take accountability or they won't validate his experience. And I'm like, they've never shown us that they can validate. They never have shown us that they can take accountability. So why would we ever expect someone to do that? To me, it's like if someone can't speak German, why all of a sudden would I expect them to be able to speak German? Like that's when I look at capabilities before I engage in conversation around conflict, because if they aren't capable, what is the purpose of me trying to communicate this with them to begin with? Just to have conflict, to feel less validated, to feel more unseen? Like, I don't see the purpose in that. And that's why I think there is an aspect of understanding, like, your internal problem in that moment is I'm not feeling seen. I'm not feeling understood. And I have, with a lot of practice, been able to learn in the moments where I'm with people who are not capable to validate myself and be like, do I understand why I would have this experience or why anyone would have this experience? And I actually think about it. And I'm like, yeah, I really can understand that. And when I allow myself to think through it like that and actually consider, like, is that like realistic? Can I understand this? It does feel validating. When there are moments where I need to feel understood or I feel the need to be understood to preserve a sense of connection, this normally happens with Scott. I agree with you. It's about, can you understand why I might feel this way, whether you agree with it or not, whether it was your intention or not. Like, can you understand why? But I think both of them are important because I think it takes a lot of training and mental energy and mental work to learn how to validate your internal self, to learn how to soothe your system. And not everyone wants to do it. And I get that. It was kind of something I didn't really have a choice whether I did or didn't do.
When we're
So,
talking about soothing the system, is it more than sitting with yourself and sorting through things in your mind?
oh yeah.
Okay, let's
Oh
talk
yeah.
about
Like,
that piece.
so science moment?
Yes.
Science moment. All right. So there are two different ways that we regulate our nervous system, top down and bottom up. What you were referencing with kind of like sitting with your feelings and thinking through things, that's a top down way of regulating your nervous system. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Your emotions will kind of tell you where your nervous system is. Then there's the bottom up way of regulating your nervous system. This is through movement. You hear all the time when you're angry, go for a walk, or exercise helps you de-stress. These are ways that we've released energy, which ultimately emotions are energy in motion. So we need to release that energy to regulate our nervous system. So one of the things that Scott and I almost always do is when we're going to have a hard conversation, we do it while we're walking because just going for a walk regulates your nervous system. If I'm trying to work through worry or anxiety, I also do that when I'm walking, typically. When I'm sad, I found that coloring or journaling, like moving my hand in smaller motions, helps me feel more regulated. You can do things like rocking back and forth, twisting, stomping your feet, um, rubbing your chest. There's butterfly taps that you can do. These are all different ways that you use your body to regulate your nervous system. Because when I think of like emotional intelligence, I think of getting the mind and the body to work together. And I think that's ultimately what soothing is. Sometimes the body leads, and then you can bring in the thoughts around, why is this bothering me? Why do I need their validation, etc. Other times, you can just go straight into the mental aspect of it. But I think it's very much person to person, experience to experience, nervous system to nervous system. But when I'm talking about soothing, I'm normally speaking about some type of movement associated thought process, whether that's walking and thinking, writing, um, going for a run, stomping your feet, jumping on a trampoline. Like, there's so many different things you can do to activate different parts of your nervous system to kind of help you calm yourself to think in a more intelligent manner so that we can actually have the intelligence of our emotions work with us to soothe ourselves. Does that make sense?
In my mind, presently, I'm thinking about when we saw Bessel van der Kolk last year. And
Great.
he, of course, is the father of things living in your body,
Your
your
body.
your trauma,
Yeah.
your emotions. all of it lives in your body. And I don't know that I agree with him completely. I'll just throw this out there. How dare you disagree with Bessel van der Kolk? But he says that talking about your problems and talking about things isn't that useful. Uh, and I don't know that I agree with that just because of things that I've seen with my own eyes and the way that I operate myself. I know that it helps me to talk about things, but I do believe everybody's different, and I think different things work for different people. And one of the things that he says works is long-term mindfulness practices. So, walking could be a mindfulness practice, meditation could be a mindfulness practice, journaling could be a mindfulness practice. But he also said that boxing was a mindfulness practice. Personally, I've never boxed, so I can't.
Love boxing. I love boxing. It's very cathartic. It's very cathartic. I'm curious, since I know you happen to have a lovely singing voice,
Hmm.
have you ever tried singing when you've needed that kind of verbal soothing?
Yes, as a kid, um, my when I had to do homework in the office was a separate building that I had to walk to, and I would get nervous if it was dark outside, and I would just sing like really loud
That's
on the
great.
way there. And I still to this day, I mean, there's constantly a song in my head regardless, but if I'm nervous, I will sing a lot of times.
So here's why I ask, because I agree, I don't know whichever, but I don't think talking about your problems always works. I think it definitely can work. I think it's very person to person, experience to experience, etc. But what I do know, I think I mentioned to you that I took like that neurosomatic intelligence course. And a lot of what it is teaching simple ways to trigger your nervous system back into its parasympathetic response, which is its calm, rested. And a lot of the exercises are around vocals. There's a lot of vocal exercises. So in a way,
Like alms, is that what you're saying? Like
it can be
chanting?
it can be ohms, it can be singing, it can even be talking. And that's kind of where I'm going with it is just talking about your problems is using your vocals and your diaphragm, which is heavily associated with your nervous system. So it can also soothe your nervous systems. I think the caveat is what you're talking about. Is it activating you more or is it calming you more? That's
Yeah.
where I think the soothing aspect comes into it. Because
Yeah.
if we're just thinking through our problems on repeat,
Yeah, that's
it's
not,
feeding
yeah.
the fire, right? And that's where I think talking about your problems hits a wall because if you're talking and it just keeps feeding the fire and feeding the fire, like you're screwed. Like you're not in soothing, you're just in talking. And I think that's when we have to recognize this isn't helping. And we both have had this. I've had moments where I've called a certain friend or someone and I needed something and they were giving me the opposite of what I needed. And I had to be like, I love you, but this isn't what I need right now. And I called like you or one of my other friends who I know could give me what I needed. And then that's kind of how it's been. So it's also about like knowing who's going to feed your fire, who's going to calm your fire, right?
Well, yeah, and I was thinking of co-regulation, which is
Yeah.
an energy flow between two people, and that always exists, whether we acknowledge it or not. And if somebody's energy isn't matching you in the way that you need, then you're not going to co-regulate.
Right. And I think like it's interesting, right? So we're talking about outside changes don't fix inside problems. And we're where we are is like, okay, step one is you need to recognize you're trying to fix an internal problem with an outside solution. Be that getting healthier and losing weight, getting more money, bigger house, or even just trying to get validation or accountability from another person. That's still outside solutions that might feel like a band-aid, but the hole is still there. The wound is still there. And I think that's the hardest thing for people to recognize is like the purpose of soothing is to stitch the wound, and only we can do it as individuals. Like co-regulating helps because it makes you feel a sense of belonging and like you're not alone, which is so important in human beings. but it doesn't heal the wound fully because only you can do that. It might be the kind
True.
of the thing that kicks the can down the road that you're like, okay, now I feel like I can because I feel safe in myself. So it could be that aspect, but it still needs a active role by the participant to truly soothe the system. And this, in my opinion, is why we go to those outside solutions because we don't know how to soothe our internal system.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think until now it was really anything that was taught or talked about. I mean, I certainly never as a kid in particular, like Um
Well, interesting because I think it goes back to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like we didn't experience World War II or the Great Depression, and although like our parents, like they even had Vietnam, so like we haven't had a war like that where our physical safety has been truly threatened. And if we look at hierarchy of needs, that allows us to access
about these
greater
things. Yeah.
emotional
Yeah. I
well-being.
say that all the time, that privilege has given us the opportunity to consider mental health. And I think that's also part of why there's more mental illness now than ever before. I mean, that's what people say. Um, but I think all of our generational trauma that people have inherited over the years is finally getting an opportunity to surface because we have the privilege to feel our feelings.
Yeah. And I'm sure we've had this conversation before because it feels like we have, but we're very aligned in that. And I really do feel like it's a privilege that we are resistant to because it takes work, but it's also life-changing and incredibly freeing to be able to have conversations with people that you love and disagree without abandonment, without neglect. Like connection is why we are here. I truly believe that. And families are complicated. Communication sucks. People don't know how to communicate what they actually want or what they actually feel. We're much more comfortable criticizing and judging. But if we understand how and when to connect and being able to hold different opinions, but valuing the human being behind the opinions, not summarizing their entirety in an opinion, it allows us to co-regulate even with different opinions. But I think that's something that we're far, we have a ways to kind of get to for a majority of the population. I think right now it really is, okay, we weren't taught about this. How do
Yeah.
we learn to soothe?
I would say the majority of the population doesn't even know what they feel.
Oh, for
If they
sure.
do know what they feel, they certainly don't know how to describe it or explain it. I mean, I go through that with my clients all the time. As I'm talking to someone, they're starting to figure out what it is that they're feeling and where that feeling's coming from and all of that. Like that's really ground zero.
I mean, I really think we're at the surface, like we're starting to scratch the surface of emotional intelligence, which allows us to use more intelligence from within our body. But I totally agree with you that most people don't know what they're feeling to the point I went to a conference a couple years ago and the host asked like a room of 1,500 people, raise your hand if you're afraid of your emotions. And 80% of the hands went up and they were coaches in that room. And I was shocked by it. Like, I don't always like all of my emotions, but I respect them and I understand that they serve a purpose that maybe I'm not always privy to or I don't like, I don't enjoy. But I also recognize that hard moments create beautiful moments, and hard things are reflective of love and care and consideration. It's like we only want to be in this top half of emotions because we don't know how to soothe our lower half of emotions. So we just try to avoid, distract, numb out. And it's largely because our parents and our grandparents never had the safety. So it really is a privilege. But I think we beat ourselves dry. We judge ourselves. We tell ourselves we're lazy because we keep trying to fix internal problems with external solutions. I think if we can just recognize, like, okay, that doesn't work. Like, if I had a back pain, I wouldn't go talk to a therapist about it. Like, talking about my back pain isn't going to help me. I'd go to a physical therapist, one who's going to help me with back exercises, outside pain, outside solution, right? If I'm depressed and I go to a physical therapist, that's not going to make my depression feel better. I'm going to need an Alicia and I'm going to go to a therapist because inside pain needs inside solutions. And I think if we could just recognize, oh, this is an internal pain, I need an internal solution, then we can start to understand ourselves better, to understand our emotions, to learn how to soothe our systems. And that way we don't beat ourselves up. We don't judge ourselves. We don't think we're lazy because we realize the whole reason we were judging ourselves and thinking we're lazy is because we misunderstood where the solution was.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? Or am I just
Yeah.
rambling?
No, it makes sense. I was just thinking that I think a lot of our, when I think about just relationship conflict, like just that, I think a lot of times it feels like the solution is within the relationship, which sometimes it is. But I think we also have to come back to ourselves first. Why am I angry? What am I angry about? What am I upset about? Why are my feelings hurt by this? Where is this coming from for me?
You know
And
what I love about that? You said that one of the things that you and Sebastian have grown to is like you don't necessarily have to agree, but understanding, like if he can understand where you're coming from, that makes all the difference, right?
yeah.
What you just told me is like, where am I coming from? Why am I like you're seeking internal understanding? That's internal validation. I agree with you.
Mhm. Okay, nice piecing together there. That was good.
Yeah,
That was good.
I got some nuggets. I'll connect some dots
Yes,
for you.
beautiful. Yeah, I mean, that was something I learned in graduate school that everything comes back to me anyway. Like, we were
Mhm.
talking about fat kid earlier. I used that word, okay? And fat kid is like offensive. I understand. Uh, but to me, it's not offensive. If somebody called me a fat kid, I would laugh because I've never thought of myself as a fat kid. That was never something that I thought of myself as. And I'm not trying to brag when I say that. That was just never a part of my identity. So if somebody's jab at me is you're such a fatty, I'm just gonna laugh at that. If somebody else who struggles with weight gets called a fatty, they're not going to laugh. They're going to feel very hurt. They're going to feel all kinds of things.
Right.
So this is something I learned in graduate school that I did not like. I was like, oh, so everything that I feel comes back to me in some way. And that's not necessarily anybody else's responsibility. That's stuff I've got to look at. And I don't love that. I don't love that one bit.
I get that. I don't love it and I love it.
I know, right? Yeah.
Ah, I hate
It
those
gives
because I
us a
feel
lot more power.
that's why. Because I'm someone I don't want to give another person control over my emotional regulation. Like I want to have the ability, I want to have the power to choose how to soothe myself, when to soothe myself, etc. It's an imperfect practice. I'm still growing with it, but I don't like that it all comes back to me, but I love that that means I'm the one who has the power to show up for me and soothe myself rather than having to hope or wait for someone else. And I think that there's a comfort in that for me, is knowing that it's annoying, but I've got my own back. That makes sense?
I love that. And I think it's so important.
I
And I
do
think
too.
that's the perfect note to end on, actually, because I think it's important for us to have our own back. And I think that that's a skill in and of itself. And I think that's what we've been talking about this whole time is like,
Yeah, we have been understanding how to have your own back and
yeah.
even recognizing when you need to have your own back. I like it. That's what the new title is, How to Have Your Own Back.
What an evolution.
See, we didn't even know it. You guys went on the ride with us.
All right, and we thank you very much for coming on the ride with us, and we'll see you next time.
Toodles.